Hey everybody, Simone here with Bulletproof Business Growth. As always, with some ideas and insights, what to pay attention to when you are growing and scaling your business and the problems multiply. So today's episode title is Confident but Clueless, Leading the Un-Coachable Employee. And I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about. So the core message here really is like some team members think they're crushing it when they're actually holding the business back. You can't lead somebody who refuses to be led. So today's episode really breaks down the difference between confidence and competence, how to handle inflated self-worth, and then how to separate the truly coachable from what's more cultural drain actually. So let me start by asking you the hard question. What do you do when your highest potential hire becomes your biggest liability? And not because they're malicious or lazy, but because they think they're already excellent and they won't hear otherwise. So, maybe you've been there before. You've got a key team member, let's say maybe even a chief of staff or manager, someone who talks a big game, who insists that they're great at their job, but week after week, they're making mistakes, they're showing up unprepared, they're pushing back on coaching, and worst of all, they think they are an outperforming, outstanding employee. You might give them feedback, they deflect, you bring in solutions, and most of the time their response is, I've already taken care of that, I've already fixed it, this is already done. And slowly you start feeling like you're the one who's completely crazy. So this episode is for that moment. And we're going to talk about how to spot self-inflated worth early, right? So right in the beginning, you can nip it in the bud. Why your potential hires, as in the ones that you hired for potential and not actual contribution, may be huge culture risks in disguise. How to test coachability before you waste months trying to fix the unfixable. And look, that very piece right there is one of our clients' biggest challenges. It's one of the biggest drains on their resources, bandwidth, energy. So we're really going to focus on that, because knowing when to pull the plug and when to lean in and coach more and try to grow people is like, that's going to be like the biggest thing in your experience as a leader. And of course, we're going to talk about the systems that create clarity and accountability so that you have to be no longer at the mercy of just somebody's ego. Look, in leadership, clarity isn't optional, and coachability honestly is not a nice to have. It's the line between growing a high performance culture and getting trapped in one that quietly rots sort of from the inside out. So let's start with a real story. A chief of staff that I once led had all the signs of greatness on paper, right? She had a strong background. She was very articulate. She was very assertive. But within weeks, we had more and more cracks that started to show up, like missed basic admin stuff, unprofessional dress in client-facing meetings, constantly reshuffling priorities without alignment with the rest of the leaders. And honestly, a complete inability showed up in managing up and down. I don't think she had any clue what that actually meant. And the worst part about that was, like, she was my direct report. She was mine to grow and coach. And every time I gave her feedback, her response was, I'm actually really good at my job. So no, thanks for the feedback. No, you tell me more. Just a wall of defensive self-perception. And that's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a skill gap. I was dealing with a self-awareness problem. And here's what you need to know about that. People who are overly confident but underskilled are often the most dangerous hires in your business, because they don't just underperform, they undermine clarity. They argue with expectations, they erode your authority, and they confuse the rest of the team. And that's, of course, it's now you have a ripple effect of issues going on. So if you're seeing those red flags, you're not crazy. But the longer you let go, the longer you let the situation go, the more damage it does, and it'll show up all over the place when you're not even thinking it's going to go there. Okay, so let's break that down, because I really want you to understand what's at stake here. For one thing, and this is a huge piece for me, is cultural debt. Because when your team sees you tolerating somebody who resists feedback, they begin to question your standards. They begin questioning your authority, your leadership practices in general, and that is definitely a silent morale killer. And you'll also have more people kind of pick up on those behaviors. So that's huge. Then, of course, it's a giant waste of time. You spent hours documenting, repeating, hand-holding, recoaching, instead of growing them or growing other people, right? So you're taking resources away from other people and you're overtaxing yourself. So that's basically a leadership tax that you cannot afford. Then third, it's performance confusion. If somebody thinks they're really crushing it, but they keep missing, it creates a trust gap. You stop believing them and they stop believing you. And then, of course, another big one that relates right to the culture piece is you're going to have a player fallout, because the people who are coachable, like your superstars, they start to question why they are held to a higher bar than someone who keeps getting passes, right? So that's, again, when they're questioning your integrity as a leader, and that erodes culture and trust even further. So here's the hard truth. Just because someone talks like a leader doesn't mean they lead. And just because someone has potential doesn't mean they are ready. And again, I said this in the beginning, I see this so often. A lot of our clients are really well-meaning people who get suckered into this seeing potential in someone and then dragging the situation out far too long when the signs are there. So leadership really means knowing when to build and when to break those ties. So here's where most leaders get stuck. You give feedback, they argue. You try to clarify, and they insist that it's already solved. You're starting to doubt yourself, so you soften your message. You make it more digestible. You're being more polite, and in doing so, you dilute your leadership. And look, this is when you're in that situation, you can pretty much do whatever you want. It's not going to go anywhere. So here's why feedback doesn't land with these kinds of employees. And I'm going to I should have said this in the beginning, because I think for a lot of you, this is an issue that you have with the younger generations who come in expecting that they're going to crush it and believing that they are when they're not, because they haven't really had a taste of what it's like to be in the real world. So they see critique as an attack on their identity. They assume that high visibility means high performance. They confuse effort with actual results, and they've never been held accountable before. They've never had measurable standards, so they don't really understand what that means. But you cannot shift this with nice words. So the only thing you can do in that situation is you need a systemic reset. So the key here is to stop debating perception and start enforcing performance. So we don't care what perception is. We want to look at actual facts, actual data. So that might start with, well, and our clients know what we would do. We would absolutely make sure that everybody has a performance plan from day one. And with that performance plan, that means now we have really clear goals and expectations. That also means they have a weekly scoreboard that they're performing to. So that also means they have objective outcomes that they're responsible for. And you can use a rubric. You can go green, yellow, red, and ask them to score themselves before you do, and then you compare. So if they keep rating themselves really high, if they keep rating themselves green while everybody else thinks red, now you have proof of the problem and a coaching opportunity that's hard to deny. And it's a conversation where you can keep pointing to the facts, right? So this is a really big thing. So we get rid of beliefs and opinions, but we really just look at facts. And facts is, data, right? So let's talk decision points. So you might really start asking yourself, can this person grow? Are they actually able to grow? That's a really important question to ask. Or are they just not built for this role? Sometimes an inflated sense of self also could be that they're very insecure because they're actually not crushing it and they know it, but they create this smokescreen to make you think that they're crushing it because they don't want to get fired or they don't want to get moved, especially if they might have been hired kind of for the wrong role. So here's a 5-question coachability test. Number 1, when given feedback, do they get curious or do they get defensive? Number 2, do they reflect on outcomes or do they just defend their intent? 3 is, do they repeat mistakes or implement changes? Now you'll really know if you're watching this for a while and you're seeing them actually improving, then now we have a better situation. The other part too is, can they accept fault? Can they accept that they made a mistake without drama? Can they actually own the mistake, right? So that's a huge, huge one. And then are they growing more valuable or just more visible because they're making a big stink about what's happening? They might have, in really bad situations, they might actually report you to HR because they just don't like the way that you're handling. I mean, now we're having all sorts of problems, right? But if you answer no to 2 or more of these questions, this person is not coachable right now, and that's something that you just have to actually accept. Now, here's what you do about this. And what I'm going to propose here is very, very similar to a traditional PIP, performance improvement plan. However, it's framed a little more softly. So, and you have to make up your mind beforehand, right? Are you okay with firing this person or have this person walk? Because the only way to improve this situation is by you challenging them either into improving the situation or removing themselves out of the situation. So you want to start by running a 30-day, we're just going to call it, instead of a PIP, we're going to call it a 30-day alignment sprint. So every week, you're going to run 1 to 3 weekly outcomes. So you make a weekly plan with them where they're responsible for 1 to 3 weekly outcomes that must be completed or reported about by the end of the week so that you have clear understanding why they did get done or didn't get done. Make sure that is all, like I said, in writing, right? This is a plan that's written down that everybody has. I really like when people have to sign this. You want to ask for self-assessment. Like we said earlier, ask them for their perception of success or not success before you give them feedback. And then we want to track this, right? And you want to track behavior and not promises. So you can start this, you can make this more digestible or more tolerable for them by reframing the stakes, right? So you can say, hey, you know what? This is not personal, but performance matters here and growth is absolutely required, not optional. And then, of course, you absolutely have to hold the line. Like, if you don't see meaningful change in 30 days or less, now we need to do something else. So you want to say to them, hey, if we don't see meaningful change in 30 days or less, we'll need to revisit your role or your employment here, or, you know, whatever it is that you're considering. And you're not punishing them, you're protecting your business, and most importantly, its culture. Because remember, like, if you tolerate this with one person, pretty soon you'll have more people behaving in the same way, or you have your really good people starting to doubt you as a leader and bounce. So let's zoom out for a question. If one employee can throw off your whole rhythm, right? Your business doesn't just have a personnel problem, it has a systems gap. And this is really important, because if this is something that happens more often, where you keep wondering if you hired right, but maybe you actually did hire right. Maybe you did hire an A player, but you haven't really given them the tools and systems and structure that they can be successful in. So this is where improving systems is absolutely a must-do when you want to grow. Because imagine this is difficult enough when you have a small team, but when you have a team of 10, 20, 50, 100 plus people, this becomes completely untenable. So to create those systems, you have to start by at least having clear goals that are documented weekly, where expectations are visible, not verbal, right? So you don't talk about it. Like, a lot of our clients come in and they think they're doing a really good job because they talk about stuff all the time, but they're not documenting it. It's not written down. It's not shared. Nobody really knows what it is. And so it's nothing that you can actually hold people accountable to. So feedback, and then feedback needs to be structured, not emotional. Our clients have a very clear modality for how to give feedback in an unemotional way, where it's based on facts, where it considers the background and the impact, where it helps people understand what their role in this problem is, and then there's very clear ways of requesting change and having accountability around that. So feedback has to be structured, not emotional. And then wins and misses are logged. They're written down, they're clear, they're not assumed. And then everybody self-assesses, like I said earlier, before they get coaching, so that we can understand if there's a big gap between what a person thinks how they're doing and what you're seeing. So this is what I call a clarity culture, right? And a clarity culture, in a clarity culture, spin doesn't survive. You can't spin it, because now we're based on structure and facts. So here's what that looks like in practice. So weekly recap meetings where 15 minutes everybody scores themselves. So we have a clear recap of what went on, how were we successful, and everybody scores themselves. This is, I know, what people are going to groan about, but you want to make sure that everybody has weekly one-on-ones with their leaders that compare expectations to outcomes. So that means everybody has to have a clear plan that they're performing to, so now that we can compare what's real and what's imagined, right? And then that living scorecard that's tied to actual deliverables, and that is, you can't have that without having a clear plan. And we really need the you said you did accountability trail. And again, that is so based on having really good planning and preparation, so that everybody is 100% crystal clear on what the expectations are, what they're responsible for. Everybody should have a RACI matrix for any project, anything they're working on, and then of course the plan that backs it up in terms of what timelines are, what deliverables are, so that nobody can point back to, I was confused, I didn't know, because clarity here rules. So this is the system that makes confidence earned, and not just something that somebody knows how to act. And look, if somebody still resists after you do all that, if they still argue If they still avoid ownership, I think you have an answer now. So here's the bottom line. You can't lead people who won't let themselves be led. And you can't grow a company that's stuck managing egos instead of outcomes. So start here. Document expectations. Make feedback objective. Test coachability early and clearly, and don't tolerate situations that you shouldn't tolerate, and stop mistaking potential for performance. Because confidence without accountability isn't leadership, it's noise. And your job is, as a business owner, as a CEO, is to clear the noise. So if you're ready to build systems that empower coachable leaders and eliminate cultural drag, check out the AI Business Scaling Blueprint. It's a tool set that helps small business owners install structure, clarity, and white space, which is what you really need, so that you can finally lead the business that you were meant to build, right? So remember, the problem here isn't always the person. Sometimes it's the system that lets them spin, or the lack thereof. So build the system, lead the culture, protect the mission, and you don't have to do the heavy lifting. That's why we've built the AI Business Scaling Blueprint. Reach out to us, and we'll work with you on that. So until next time, keep leading with clarity and courage. Remember, it's AIBusinessScalingBlueprint.com. We'll talk to you next week.